Chemtrails? What are chemtrails?
Chemical trails, Daddy, and they're very bad.
I look up to the sky. Can you tell me why? Can you tell me why?
Hello, this is Dane Wigington with GeoEngineering Watch Radio for the week of February 14th, 2015. I have Russ with us today as always. We'll take questions early on, hopefully about 15 minutes after the hour. If I could ask anybody and everybody who calls in, if you can keep your question condensed and concise, we'll try to answer as quick as we can and try to get to as many calls as we can, assuming the phone lines work today. That's the only trouble we've had. But we'll try to go through as many callers as we can that way. The total weather and biological warfare against the U.S. population and population of the globe continues. The public in general, until now, the U.S. public in particular, and those around the globe as well, but has not cared much about what those in power do, so long as their individual, the population's own individual personal pursuits of pleasure are allowed to continue. I've talked about this before, but it's imperative because this is the society we have now. For example, after 9/11, I spoke to a friend who I thought I knew. I knew him for 30 years. And when it came down to it, he made it clear to me that if those in power needed to blow up the World Trade Center and kill a few thousand people in order to have the excuse to go after the resources necessary to keep his party going, he was okay with that. I'm no longer friends with this person, as I've mentioned before. But we have a lot of that kind of attitude. Not many who would admit to it, but in the bottom line scenario, that's where they're at. So, again, until people are affected personally, they refuse to wake up, but I would argue that's about here. They can't hide the climate engineering much longer. We saw, starting on February 10th, a barrage of mainstream media articles on climate engineering, everybody from the New York Times to the LA Times. We haven't seen this kind of an onslaught before, and I published an article showing 22 easy links to these mainstream publications. Now, at the same time, something has been done to my Facebook pages. The reach that we had dropped by about 90%. Is this a coincidence? I doubt it. The site visits on GeoEngineering Watch seem to decline as well. The Facebook completely went off. We have notes from people saying they can't share the articles. And again, when the reach drops 90%, something's wrong. Something's absolutely wrong. At the same time, again, one more item. We have the Arctic Methane Emergency Group, frontline group of scientists. I have communicated a fair amount with one of those, a primary member. Their data in regard to what's happening on the ground is accurate. We can verify that from a number of sources as far as the sea temps, the methane hitting the atmosphere, the ramifications from this. All that data is accurate. But where the AMIG group becomes a tool of the power structure and is absolutely lying is when they call for emergency wartime climate engineering to be done. Now, there's no chance that they don't know. It's been happening for 65 years. There's no chance of that. I don't buy that. And the AMIG member that I do know, I believe is unable to talk about this issue. Not just for fear of the loss of his paycheck and his pension, but I think much worse. And we know, I haven't seen any more data on this from somebody I know that's a little bit on the inside of media circles. We just saw TV news journalist Brian Williams get raked over the coals. And the story I'm getting is that 3 of his colleagues, who are also journalists, who are about to form some sort of independent media source, those 3 colleagues are all dead now. Brian's alive. He's a little too high profile to take out, apparently. But what's really behind that story? So when we get groups like disinformation groups like I mentioned, AMIG, that now, in conjunction with the release of all the geoengineering articles, not just our Facebook sites, but others that are discussing this most important issue of climate engineering being restricted. And now we have AMIG coming out, giving a warning, a global warning, that unless we commence with emergency, all-out climate engineering, civilization will collapse. That's where AMIC becomes disinformation. So we all have to sift the baby from the bathwater again. Civilization, short of some unforeseen, unknown power that could intervene, I don't say that lightly, I don't know what else is out there, but short of that, civilization as we know it is collapsing. It's collapsing as we speak. The geoengineers are now desperate to try to create the headlines. We've talked about this every week. It seems like we're going over the same subject over and over, but we're not. The fact is, this scenario continues. They're focusing a lot on Boston now, the record snow in Boston, again and again and again and again. They're throwing everything they have at this, trying to create the lowest temperatures they can. Very shallow layer. It's important everybody remembers that. It's a very shallow layer of cold, nothing natural about it. Temperatures maybe 200-300 feet up off the deck would rise astoundingly. What the Weather Channel and mainstream media is not telling you, as always, is about the record highs around the globe. They don't tell you last night the nighttime low in Billings, Montana shattered the record for high. That's a record high low temperature. That's a confusing term, but that's what it's called, a record high low temperature. So the nighttime low was almost 50 degrees in Billings, Montana. They don't tell you yesterday in Long Beach, California, it was 90 degrees, record-shattering high. There's records all over the country, record highs. Now, another record low in Watertown, New York, last night was 32 below. So let's compare that. In Billings, Montana, almost 50 degrees above record-shattering high low temperature, that confusing term again. And Watertown, 32 below, an 82-degree difference in regions where Billings should be colder than Watertown. More records, Craig, Wyoming yesterday, 60 degrees. Records all over again. And I sent Russ, I hope you can post that in the chat room, 2 maps. One is the Ham departure from normal temperature map, and you can throw a rock from 2025 above normal to 2025 below. Meteorologically, this is just wrong, period. And we see the Weather Channel again, what they talk about is they'll put maps up that are wind chill temperatures. That's not an actual temperature, it's a wind chill. We have a 50-mile-an-hour wind, that makes the temperatures look like you're at the South Pole. But that's not a real reading. But only in the top corner do they show the wind chill. So people look at that map and they think, my God, how could it be so cold? They don't even realize it's wind chill because they're not supposed to realize it's wind chill. And this is Winter Storm Neptune, by the way. The theatrical names are part of the theater. It's part of the Weather Channel theater. It's important everybody remembers that as well. That's all this is theater, to try to keep the population confused till the last possible minute. Again, while the climate engineers create this, the power structure is digging in. So we have another issue that I've looked at a lot over the last 10 years, and now there are some data to really tie this into the atmospheric geoengineering, the ocean iron fertilization. Some have heard of this, many have not. But this is another major area of climate engineering. And we saw this week Weather Channel showed and talked about on air. They showed satellite imagery with what they called ship trails. Now, there are proposals to use ships to create low-level clouds. But I've discussed this issue in these particular satellite images with former defense industry contractor Mark McCandlish. He's a good personal friend. And he concurred with my conclusions that there is no chance that what the Weather Channel called ship tracks could be from a ship. Because how could you have a trail from a ship that's hundreds of miles long and the same width? Ships can't move that quickly. They can't. By the time they travel hundreds of miles, anything at the start of that journey would have long since dissipated, no matter what they were putting up. So this appears to be trying to find an excuse to write off the clear aerosol spraying trails that we see over the ocean as being, quote, ship tracks. So the disinformation is so rampant, you can't go with anything that the official theater puts out. Now, in regard to ocean fertilization, there was a suggestion recently, and I think it has validity, that perhaps coal fly ash is a part of what they're using. Again, I stress a part. I do not believe it is a sole element. None of the data backs that up. But again, we have to sift the baby from the bathwater. It looks like it may be a part. Now, in regard to ocean iron fertilization, I found solid data, which I'll post tomorrow, on specific research to use iron processing slag, toxic slag, for the specific purpose of ocean fertilization. So I found that peer-reviewed report, and I will post it tomorrow. So what does this mean? It means it's likely, and I found another study indicating a very high degree of bioavailable iron showing up over the oceans. Of course, it's being blamed on the China coal power plants, and certainly some may be from there. But with the exception of mercury, these heavy metals don't migrate well. Mercury converts to a gaseous state, so it migrates further, so we have mercury everywhere. So if there's that much iron over the oceans, are they not spraying it? And why would we think they're not spraying it? When they want to fertilize the oceans to create algae blooms, plankton blooms, which then suck up CO2, but that acidifies the ocean. Again, the negatives, just like with that stratospheric aerosol geoengineering, ocean iron fertilization is horrific. It will kill the oceans. Those in power don't care. Their type of blindness cannot be cured. So when we have all these dots to indicate that perhaps, probably, toxic waste product from iron processing, slag, is being used to fertilize the oceans, part of the spray mix. So let's think about the power structure, how they try to kill two birds with one stone, or three or four, as many as they can. When they can create the solar radiation management toxic cloud covers over the oceans, which we know they're doing. We have satellite imagery to prove it. And that same material then settles down, of course, on the surface of the ocean, where it then becomes ocean fertilization material. All of these processes extremely destructive to the environment, but all of it appears to be going on. So now we have 400 dead zones around the planet, expanding by the day, some as big as 10,000 square miles. The ocean is acidifying. Marine life is dying everywhere. Jellyfish are taking over, by the way, because that's what happens when you create a massive plankton bloom. It sucks up all the oxygen as well. So you have anoxic and hypoxic zones. That's part of the dead zones. Jellyfish live in those dead zones very well. Japan's fishing industry is going under because there's jellyfish that sometimes have a width of 9 feet. It's called a nomura. They're taking over everything. This is the planet's response. You can't hamper these natural systems without doing damage, nothing but damage, and that's what we see. So the dead zones are increasing, the anoxic zones, oxygenless zones, ocean acidification is increasing radically. How could it not? How could it not increase when you're intentionally causing the oceans to suck up CO2 in order to get it out of the atmosphere, to hide it? And that's the intent for the power structure, hide it. Just hide everything. Just like the Gulf of Mexico, just like the chemical Corexit, to those who don't know what that is, look it up. Chemical banned throughout the globe, but they use it in the Gulf of Mexico again to hide the oil. The environmental impact reports said that that chemical made that situation 52 times more toxic, but they used it anyway because the goal was to hide it. But you can only hide so much for so long in a finite container, and that's what our planet is, a finite container. So I will leave with this, and Russ, I want to get to you. The reason we're in this dark corner again is because a huge percentage of the population is so utterly and totally complacent that they can't seem to let go of their own personal pursuits of pleasure to take a stand for the common good. And you can't fight with one arm tied behind your back. If you're texting and playing with one hand, you can't fight a battle with the other. You can't. You have to focus with everything on that battle, or you'll lose that battle. It's that simple. So we need people to figure out why they're here. Is it to go golfing on Sunday or to watch the game? Or is it to try to provide some semblance of a future for your children? People have to decide. And that time of decision is now, because we don't have time to spare in this fight. Russ, I want to go to you. If you can tell me the conditions where you're at on the ground. You told me a little bit off the air about the spraying being more constant now. I want to hear about that and your summation that was, I think, also correct, that they only have so many resources, so they could, you see breaks in the spraying at times, but fill us in on that again.
Yeah, absolutely. Cold here. Got snow right now in Philadelphia. Looks like we're going to have 11 degrees tonight, 28 degrees right now. Here's the situation: is what they're doing. The pattern that I've seen happen, and this has been going on for a few years now, is we basically have 2 strong weeks and then 1 relatively mild week. The contaminants are in the air constantly, but they are much more mild. And I was talking to you off air thinking that really this probably is just a lack of aircraft. They're diverting their assets to other locations. This is what I was thinking. The other thing I wanted to also give you some feedback about is I'm having a lot of anomalies on my websites also that provide information. We used to have between 1,000 and 1,500 unique visitors a day on one of our sites, and it dropped down to just a couple hundred when we started having glitchy connections. This was right after there was all the talk about the net neutrality bill that was up for debate, and some policies changed, and we saw a drastic change in traffic. We saw it go back up after we started talking about publicly. Now it's going back down, so there's all kinds of anomalies going on there.
Well, there is. We see in the reach, the Facebook reach, on what we would have only a week ago maybe had a 30,000 reach. We see in the last several days 1,500, maybe 2,000. That's 5-7% of what we should have. That's a virtual crash. So somebody ripped the rug out underneath the searches. And
yeah, not to mention one of the videos we have. You know, I mentioned this before, but I checked the numbers again today. 42,000 hits I show on my counter of people that have come to the page that we have embedded a YouTube channel, a YouTube video. YouTube video is only showing 3,000 hits.
Well, I mean that's the epitome of indication of how those in power try to throttle back what appears to be the traffic at sites so they don't look as popular, so people aren't as impressed by the information there. So we all have to contend with that. I hope people that are seeking the information will try extra hard to get at it, share it, do whatever you can to spread it around. Again, the whole industrialized society scenario that we've grown in is a snake eating its own tail. The Baltic Dry Index, those that aren't familiar with that should look it up. It's the most untarnished indicator of global economic activity there is. This is all shipping over the water from anywhere to anywhere. I'm looking at the chart right now, and we are at record lows for the last 30 years. That means shipping is not happening. Any illusion of a global economy is exactly that. It's an illusion. So we see the push for World War III in Ukraine. That's the U.S. absolutely trying to start some sort of conflict because the dollar is about to be exterminated as the global reserve currency. That's how the empire funds its insanity. So many aspects of this equation. And it's, again, let's go back to the spraying. How does the power structure, if things get too bad, if they get too out of control and too many people wake up to the power structure, why would we think they would not put something incredibly toxic in the spray mix to take us all out of the game? Certainly that must be looked at as a very real possibility, which makes this battle all the more imperative. And all those people that are not engaged, and there's a lot that aren't engaged, there's a huge percentage of people in this fight that show up once a month. You can't win a battle that way. Can't do it. So I hope everybody, I know the people on this call are probably completely committed, and I'm very grateful for that. But for those around us, we should be relentless in our effort to try to make them understand the gravity of what we face. Russ, can you open up the phone lines?
Absolutely. For those who want to call in, and we've got callers on the line already, so please call in soon so you can speak with us. We'd love to hear your question. Call in now if you want to chat or ask questions. The number is 718-717-8296. That's 718-717-8296. Just let me know when you're ready for callers.
Okay, Russ, you said there was one. If there's one in the line?
Yeah, we do. A caller with your number that ends in 23. Who are we speaking with?
Hey, Russ. Hey, Dane. John Viscuso. How you guys doing?
Hey, John. How are you?
The reason you guys are getting blocked, emails and websites and all that's coming from Fort Wayuka out there. Veterans Today was constantly being attacked by them, and they're intel people that they work with because they're all former special intel agents that formed the Veterans Today. They tracked it down to Fort Wayuka up there, and evidently Gordon Duff still has clearance up there, who supersedes the general running it, and he figuratively said that they bitch slapped the general. He thought he had control over everything, and that stopped it for a while. But that's where all that's coming from. It's from the Army, and they're a listening base over there. And down here in Georgia, it's been clear here for the past 3 days, but it's bitter cold, and the trees are actually bending over here. You can see the limbs of the trees bending over. The trees I have surrounding my house used to be straight up, and now all the limbs are bending over.
Now, two things on that note, on the trees, because we're seeing the same thing here in California, and where I'm at in Northern California, we're 80-plus degrees in the daytime, nearly 60 at night. We're seeing the same thing. When you have the organism starts to die, its ability to keep the branches erect start to diminish, and it starts to look gnarled. So, and it's certainly worse when you're exposed where you're at to the chemical ice nucleating more. That has the same effect, only worse. But again, the bioavailable aluminum, the excessive UV, the organisms are not able to, because of this bioavailable metal, they can't uptake the nutrients they need. They try to stop that nutrient uptake to avoid damage to the DNA. So there's a lot of factors affecting the trees. But if you look at trees in any film from any place at this point, they all look bad. It's amazing how few people notice it, but they all look bad. And the redwoods here are dying everywhere. In our region, they're dying off all over. So it looks bad and it's getting worse. And on the internet situation, yes, I was told the same thing by a friend that I think is quite in the know, that it's not YouTube that's actually scaling that back. It's the servers that serve YouTube is what we were told, but it amounts to the same thing. The counts don't go up. So, certainly...
Yeah, they're attacking the servers. They're attacking... I know several other people that are whistleblowers, federal whistleblowers, that are constantly attacking their sites.
So as they tighten the noose around our necks, it's not just us here in California. I'll post again the flow of moisture that's coming across the Pacific, heading right at California, that is completely blocked day after day after day. And when you look at this satellite loop, it's astounding. This huge flow of moisture looks like it's hitting a wall. And I will post several loops of this in the coming days. But it's not just us. I'm looking at a headline right now. Historic drought in Brazil sparks fear of civil unrest. Saturating the atmosphere with these desiccant particulates causes a disruption of the hydrological cycle. Combine that with the ionosphere heaters blocking moisture from flowing into particular regions. They're doing the same thing to South America. This is all-out weather and biological warfare against populations of the globe, period. There's no other description for it. So thanks for the input on the internet, and we will hope that something gives so we can start sharing data again. We'll hope for that. Thanks for that input.
I know that in Italy they are sharing everything you have over there, and they're up in arms about all this. And they're not showing it on the news, but they're actually up in arms about this and going after the public officials, and it's being suppressed. So
I'm pleased to hear that they are taking it to that point, because we are absolutely in a fight for life. The degree of climate implosion that we face right now, being fueled by climate engineering, not just climate engineering, but climate engineering is at this point the weather warfare that's making it all much, much worse. It's an all-out fight for life, and the sort of imbalances we see in the climate system right now are going to pull the whole system apart. It's happening already. So, again, I don't think we have very long before our paradigm is going to flip on its head. Power structure will become much more dangerous than they already are. So it's imperative everybody use every day, make it count. Thanks for the call.
All right, you got it.
Have a great day.
All right, Russ, bye.
Great. Hey, thank you for calling in. Caller with your number that ends in 50. Who are we speaking with?
Hello. Am I on?
Yep, you're on. Who are we speaking with?
Hi, I'm Alan David.
Hey, Alan, how you doing?
How you doing?
How are you?
I heard you guys talking about, the attacking the websites and all that, and I heard Russ say something about his counter. Well, you can't trust those counters, because if you're targeted, the hackers go in and they mess with the counters. So it's not, you could be still getting a lot of hits, and it's not registering it. They did that to me a long time ago when I did my first website. I was always targeted, and I know these, experts who know all about hacking and open source and everything. And they told me, I talked to them, and they said that's what's going on. And a lot of other people were experiencing it back then. So I absolutely know you can't count on the counter. If you're targeted, you're not going to get the true count. So forget
Yep.
that. You
We've
could
seen-
be
we've seen
getting
it over.
getting a lot more than you believe, but they want people to believe you're not. Like you said, it's a psychological warfare, information warfare, electronic warfare, weather warfare, economic warfare. They're engaging in every kind of warfare known to man that you can think of at the same time across the globe. And I've been researching this stuff for a long time, reading books since 6 years old, 1966. And I've been researching law since for the last 23, 24 years. And I know what they're doing, and it's all out on all fronts. And we just have to keep going. We can't stop at every turn in the road where we're coming under attack. We have to find a way to keep going, and that's all. Just all out. This is to the end. Like you said last week, this is like the sprint to the end. And I'm pursuing putting together a lawsuit. I am doing it daily, and I'm going to send out a notice and demand letter, and I want everyone who's interested in signing off on that or joining or adding to it, I'll send it around before it's sent out. It's a notice and demand to, the powers that be to cease and desist the spraying in California, or a lawsuit's going to be filed. I'm doing that right now, and I will be sending this around for people to give their commentary, criticisms, and suggestions before it goes out. And I'm going to do the same thing with the lawsuit. And I want
We'll look forward to seeing that when you get that posted. And again, on those people who are hampering the internet, hampering those of us that are trying to get real news out, trying to inform the population, it's important that everybody remember anybody who participates in these crimes will hopefully at some point soon be held accountable for their participation in these crimes and trials that resemble the Nuremberg trials. We hope that we can get to that point soon. And everybody who participates, it's not just your job. If your job is to help participate in a crime of ecocide, genocide, and what amounts to ultimately omnicide, then you're liable for that. So those who are participating who think they're just doing their job, it's not the case, because the only way this kind of insanity can happen globally with so many aspects you can't even quantify it is because a lot of people participate and they're just doing their quote-unquote job. But that excuse won't fly. So thanks for the call. Thanks for calling. We'll look forward to seeing what you post.
Thank you, Dane.
Thank you, sir.
One thing, Dane, that's really encouraging is that I've heard this for years now, that people have tried to track their own numbers in their own way, kind of like we do, and find discrepancies that are orders of magnitude below showing up on YouTube or Facebook or other places like this. The encouraging thing people can take home from this is that there are a lot of people waking up right now. We have our Facebook group is growing. We've got over 27,000 people. We've got 1,700 people waiting to get in, but it's growing by leaps and bounds. So people should be encouraged by that at least. That's one way we can at least look at this in a positive note.
There's a lot waking up, but there's a lot also who have been woken up for a long time that seem to burn out awfully quickly. Maybe 10 yards is as far as they can run, and the race is a little bit longer than that. They need to be able to stay in their stride longer. We need people to come back to the table, people who have been here, who know about the issue, and we've certainly seen that in our region in California, people who were solidly in the fight at one time that have now seemed to have abandoned ship, and this has to change as well. Again, and the reason some people do is because they feel if they're not guaranteed a specific outcome, if they're not guaranteed that they can win the battle, they don't even engage. What kind of moral fortitude is that? There's no guarantees. There never has been. The fight matters in and of itself, and for every single person, and this is how we should all look at it, for every single individual that any of us has any responsibility in helping to wake up, or any part in helping to wake up, that makes the whole battle matter in and of itself. If the last 12 years for me was to wake up a single person, if I really had a part in waking up a single person, it would be worth it to me. It would be worth it. We need to look at it in that way. We're not guaranteed a result, but certainly we will never get the result we want if we just give up and walk away. So anyway, I hope people find their fortitude to stay in the battle.
And it's easy. There's so much we can do. Printing out business cards with a website on there and just give them to everybody. Pass them out. Don't be afraid. Don't be ashamed. You're making an impact. And the people who pretend that they're least interested are often those who are actually paying the most attention. They're just embarrassed. We do have some calls waiting, but I'll...
Let me give one point along the lines of what you said, Russ, because you made a great point. if you're going to do a business card, and that's a great thing to do, make it solid science. Make very professional statements, not some sort of slang statement or derogatory or something that doesn't sound like it's professionally written. Do something professional, credible, and then pass that out. And there's a firm in Southern California called Color FX, 10,000 heavy paper, two-sided color business cards, 10,000 for $120. That's extremely cheap, and this is a very, very good way to spread the word. So good point, Russ. You can go on to the calls now.
Absolutely. Caller with your number that ends in 16. Who are we speaking with?
You're speaking to Reds in the chat room, or I'm known as Philip Lawson in life.
Hey, Red, how are you?
There's one thing I'm doing all right. One thing I want to mention.
You got a little muffled. You just got real muffled. I can barely hear you.
Is this better?
That's better.
All right. One thing I wanted to mention is the oceans actually heating up. I think it's related to the UV index that are off the charts nowadays, and it's making the temperature rise up, which is starting to make the ocean do odd things, like you're seeing algae blooms, the red algae blooms happening in Asia and all that.
You're exactly right. The oceans are heating radically. In fact, all-time record warmth all last year. And this is important with the ocean temperatures and the air temperatures. Although a lot of people have convinced themselves, because there are powers, special interests that want them to be convinced of this, that the temperature readings are being falsified to the upside, we see exactly the opposite. They're being falsified to the downside. So how warm are the oceans really? It seems even warmer than it's being reported, and what's being reported is already record warmth. Temperature in Slavabad recently in the Arctic Circle, 34 degrees above normal. This is absolutely cataclysmic. Methane is spewing from everywhere at this point. I got reports 2 more last week of people on the California coast that are smelling the rotten egg smell of the wind blowing in off the sea, which is generally a harbinger of hydrogen sulfide, which means the seabed is gassing from warm temperatures, thawing and releasing methane hydrate and hydrogen sulfide. So anyway, great point in the oceans, and the oceans are all that matters. A cubic meter of seawater contains 4,000 times the thermal energy of a cubic meter of air. So the geoengineers can cool down a little layer of air on the surface and make all the headlines in Boston and New England to confuse and divide everybody. That's a very, very small area in comparison to the energy being stored by the oceans and the rest of the planet.
And there's one more thing I wanted to add, too, is most people don't realize is most of the oxygen we actually breathe comes from the oceans. And once you start to disturb that and you start lowering the oxygen content in the air, humans tend to be more susceptible to diseases on top of everything else they're doing as well. So that's my key point. I'm going to log off here.
Extremely good points, both points. Thank you for bringing that up. Yes, plankton produces 50 to 60% of the oxygen that we breathe. As the oxygen count goes down, your body becomes susceptible to an endless list of ailments. Fungal aspect is a part of that. So when we see species extinction rates of 200 a day, 70 to 80% of that is fungally related. Much of that can be traced back to what was just stated from the caller, that the lower oxygen content allows more fungal proliferation. It affects our health radically. Again, everything is connected, so all those points are great. The warming oceans contain less oxygen. The plankton's dying. The UV is I do believe, in complete agreement with the caller, that UV is probably the single biggest cause dropping global plankton supplies right now. So I agree with you on all points.
Yeah, that's good information. Caller with your number that ends in 27. Who are we speaking with? Caller, are you listening to us with your number that ends in 27?
Hello?
Yep, you're on. Who is this?
This is Caesar from Melbourne, Australia.
I'm sorry, Stephen?
Caesar from Melbourne, Australia.
Okay, we're just having a hard time hearing you. Thank you very much for calling for so far. Go ahead. You got the floor.
Okay. I just got a couple of questions. Dane, you referred to Guy McPherson as having some of the most reliable and accurate data regarding the situation of our planet. As far as I've seen, the message that Guy is projecting is that there is nothing that can be done to stop what's excuse me, stop what's happening. So that's coming, and that we should act in hospice and love as we face near-term human extinction. What did you take on that, Dane?
Okay, I'm having a very hard time hearing you, but if I understood you correctly, based on the data, for example, we have from AMIG or Guy McPherson, that there's nothing that can avert what's coming. So the last part of your question I couldn't quite hear.
Yeah, try moving your mouth away from your microphone and give it another try. Usually it's clear that way. Go ahead.
All right, can you hear me now?
A little bit better. Just the last part of your question, I'll try to answer.
I'm sorry, it could possibly be the phone. No problem. Yes, basically, well, what I would like to ask is,
now I can hear you better. I can hear you better now, so go ahead.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, well, basically it's saying that there's nothing that can be done to stop what's happening, and I'd just like to see what you take on that, Dane.
Okay. Now, I mean, this is more and more people are starting to understand the gravity of what's unfolding. The methane release has been started, and mathematically speaking, at face value right now, the horizon does look extremely dark. What's the element in this equation that we don't know, that no one seems to be figuring into the equation because they refuse to acknowledge it, and that's climate engineering. What will happen if we stop climate engineering? At minimum, I believe we will buy some time. Climate engineering is not the cure. It's being sold as it's a curse that's far worse than some of the elements in the equation we face were to begin with. So, again, I acknowledge that at face value, the horizon looks very dark. But if we stop climate engineering, if the hydrological cycle was allowed to ensue, if the carbon-laden rain stimulated the forests instead of exterminating them, what would happen? We truly don't know. This is the element in the equation that we truly can't completely know at this point, because we've got 65 years of climate engineering. We have a shredded ozone layer. We have boreal forests that are dying instead of thriving. We had carbon counts about from 3 million to 5.2 million years ago during the Pliocene epoch that were perhaps as much as 25% higher than today. And we had a thriving western U.S., for example, very lush because of the increase in the hydrological cycle. We don't have that now. What's the biggest factor with the decrease in the hydrological cycle? Geoengineering. Why is the entire surface of the planet contaminated? Geoengineering. Why is the ozone layer shredded? Geoengineering. Now, the negative with the Pliocene epoch, ocean levels were 100 feet higher. That's a given. 80 of the world's top habitations on sea level are done. Nothing will stop that. In fact, the best mathematical calculations I've seen indicate at minimum, if all damage to the planet stopped now, there's 100 feet of sea level rise baked in right now, 100 feet. It's not going to happen instantly, but it's going to happen. So I do acknowledge that the equation looks very dim, that we will never have the planet we've known in any time frame that matters, but we could yet have a planet that may support life. And if there's one element that might propel us in that direction, it's to expose and stop climate engineering. So I acknowledge the validity of your question, and I would simply say this: if there's any chance, if there's a chance of changing this equation, that would be what needs to happen for us to have that chance to expose and stop climate engineering, because that would expose the whole power structure. That would start the foundation of the power structure disintegrating.
Yes.
So no matter how dark the horizon is, if we have that chance, why would we not take it? And I for one, will expend every bit of my energy and remaining time on this planet fighting toward that particular step, which is the single greatest step we could take in the right direction, no matter how dark the horizon is. That's a hard question to answer. I mean, it's not one I want to address often, but it's reality, and I appreciate you bringing it up.
Yep. All right. Thanks for that, Dan. Can I just ask Russ one more question?
Please.
Russ, I've been suffering from night sweats for about 4 years now, and after several blood tests which were negative, I'm beginning to suspect that my body may be constantly detoxing from something environmental. Do you reckon, or do you have any experience with night sweats tying into the aerosol sprayings and the fallout?
I'm sorry, I heard all of what you said except what it is you're suffering from.
Well, I'm suffering from night sweats, and I don't really want to be particularly blaming it on the fallout from the aerosol spraying, but I'm beginning to suspect it. Do you have
He's
any
saying night
experience on the
sweats,
field?
Russ. He said night sweats.
Yes, night sweats.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. Night sweats, yes. I've got a lot of feedback from people. Now, I was very mercury toxic from my amalgam fillings back before 2000. And the last couple years, when the mercury was very, very intense, my night sweats were so severe that I would wake up and my sheets would be wet. I'd have to wash them every day. As soon as the mercury came out of as soon as I had those fillings exchanged for white fillings, that stopped immediately, 100%. My body temperature changed. 16 symptoms went away, and many other things changed as well. Night sweats can be associated with heavy metal toxicity. Mercury is one of the ones that are notorious for that. Other metals can cause that as well. You can try, again, one thing that you can do is try to see if you can get some clues as to what's going on. You could try taking a supplement called Algin and see if it decreases. And the reason why Algin might decrease, and this could be a diagnostic tool, because if you see Algin decreasing the symptom, then that may clue you into what the cause of the problem is. And what Algin does is Algin is a polysaccharide derived from brown seaweed, and it stays in the digestive tract. And what it does is it absorbs barium, it absorbs radioactive metals, it absorbs mercury, it absorbs a whole slew of toxic metals very, very efficiently, because when your liver dumps them into your colon, a portion of those metals are reabsorbed. And so a lot of people get relief from that, and that also is the diagnostic tool that they help to determine whether or not they are toxic. Now, one thing I will say is you said your blood test came up clean, didn't you? Is that what you said?
Yes, correct.
Okay, one thing I will tell you that's unique to mercury. Usually in blood tests you can see elevated metals. Mercury is the exception to that, unless, according to Dr. Hal Huggins, when you're in phase 1 or phase 2 mercury toxicity, it won't show up in your blood. In fact, usually mercury will show up extra low in your blood, even though your tissue concentrations are particularly high. So blood tests really don't work. You have to use a urine porphyrin test for that. And sometimes hair tests can work as well, but urine porphyrin test is the one that Dr. Huggins preferred.
With the other heavy metals, too, it's important to remember that depending on the person, the system, their diet, those metals can be adhered in the system. And unless you do a chelation protocol before you blood test, the metals are stationary and they're not going to show up in the blood. So that's a factor to consider as well. But
exactly, they call that a challenge test, right? They'll give you usually like DMPS or DMSA 20, and then after that DMPS or DMSA, they'll take a 24-hour urine collection, and then they'll look at the mercury or the metal urine. So that's one thing.
Hope you are able to get a handle on that, and I greatly appreciate you calling from so far away and sharing your thoughts with us here in the States.
Oh, it's a pleasure to talk to you both. Pleasure.
Thank you both.
I'll leave you both to it. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Have a great day.
Thank you. Absolutely.
Good to get calls from down under. A lot of great folk there.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. People on the chat room are looking for sources of Algin. Algin is, for some people, it's a miracle. I mean, they take it and they absolutely have a reduction in symptoms that is just dramatic. That's what happened for me. It was very obvious when I was taking it. Sources for Algin: look for a distributor. The best Algin that I know of comes from Nova Scotia. There may be other sources, but sold by Nature's Sunshine Products. So just do a Google search for Nature's Sunshine Products Algin, and I think you will find what you're looking for.
It's important, again, back to in the course of keeping care of our health while we're in this battle, that we keep waging the battle itself, because if the sea temperatures keep rising, products like what you just described will no longer be available. I mean, this is the whole ecosystems are changing. I've seen this firsthand. I've spent years diving off the California coast and New Zealand and other places. I've been to Australia twice, and the ecosystem, the marine ecosystem damage right now is beyond cataclysmic. Some of these products from the sea, which are very miraculous, are no longer going to be available if the die-off continues. So it's imperative we continue with the battle to stop climate engineering.
And what about, Dane? I mean, we've seen a real push about vaccines this last couple of weeks here.
We have, and apparently trying to pass legislation that will force people in public or private schools to have their children vaccinated. If that happens, certainly my children will stay home. But I hope that starts people, forces people to face this issue that that's simply not acceptable. You can't force poison a population. So let's hope that something wakes the masses from their slumber at this point. Russ, if we can take more calls if we got a moment.
Well, we have calls open. We have slots open for calls. If anybody would like to call in, the number is 718-717-8296. So anyone who wants to call in, please call in and we'll take your questions.
And the damage right now from the UV, which was brought up earlier, even the last time I was on the Barrier Reef for a week-long diving expedition in the early 90s, the reef damage there was already quite horrific. And now the information that we see is, many sections of the reef itself are imploding. So much is being so underreported, and we are so much further into the curve from so many aspects of this that, again, it's becoming impossible to hide what's happening much longer. And that's why our situation is particularly precarious right now. And what we see on mainstream media is so far beyond any semblance of truth or reality. It's simply propaganda. It looks like something you would expect to see during the Third Reich. So the power structure is desperate. The global economy is imploding. It's completely smoke and mirrors at this point. Ecosystems are dying. Again, from Japanese fishing to fishing in other areas, the harvests are simply not there. They're coming back with nothing. Can't hide this kind of stuff very long. And the Baltic Dry Index, encourage people to look at that. If you want a truly untarnished indicator of global economic activity, look at the Baltic Dry Index. It's at all-time record lows. The global economy is in the process of crashing now. How long they can hide it, we'll see. But again, we're going to have quite a ride from here on out.
Dane, in terms of waking people up, I found that the most shocking results I get are from telling people the illnesses that are associated with this spraying. In fact, I just shared some information with a guy this afternoon related to amalgam fillings and mercury. It's amazing. That really touches people close to home.
It does. This is what we brought up at the beginning of the show, that until people are personally affected, they will keep their head in the sand as long as possible. But once they wake up and are forced to face these issues, we need them to engage wholly. And this is where, again, where does solace lie? If people are engaged in the fight thinking, well, if I give a little effort here for a week or a month, my life will go back to normal. If that's what's motivating you in the fight, you're not going to last long. If you're in the fight because it's simply the right thing to do, it's what you owe to your children, it's what you owe to whatever put you here on this planet, then you'll stay in the fight. And that's what we need. That's what we need. I mean, we should all be motivated to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. And that's it. No matter how dark the horizon looks, there's a lot we don't know. And I think a lot of, I have an image in my head about a little blade of grass coming out of the middle of a concrete jungle of many miles of asphalt in every direction. That's how tenacious life is. If life has any chance, it will survive. But it's up to all of us to try to fight for that chance. We owe it. I don't think any of our lives belong to ourselves. I mean, all of us have had things happen that could have and should have taken us out of the fight, right? We've all had close calls, maybe traffic accidents that almost happened or other things that almost happened. At the moment in time you think or believe it or realize that you could have just been taken out of the game, I would argue from that moment on your life no longer belongs to you. You owe it to the whole. You owe it to your children. You owe it to the rest of the children of the world, to all the animals and plants that have no voice short of ours. So
Dane, it's very therapeutic as well. When you get out there and you realize we have callers, by the way, but it's very therapeutic when you get out there and you realize that many people, surprisingly, will listen when you present things or just hand them a flyer, as you often say.
Yes, and to commit wholly to the fight, not halfway, but wholly to the fight. That's where solace lies. That's the only place you'll find solace. So, Russ, let's take the calls.
Absolutely. Caller with your number that ends in 50. Who are we speaking with?
Alan David again. Hey, I called for a different purpose, but I want to comment on what you just said. I almost fell off of Mount Baldy when I was about 8 or 9 years old, from 9,000 feet up. I was going straight down, and I was miraculously, about 1 to 2 seconds more, I would have been gone. And then I also almost died on the freeway coming back from Disneyland when I was small. My dad turned the wheel really quick. At the last second, a guy had come on the on-ramp going the wrong way, and everybody behind us got killed or maimed. It was in the newspaper the next day, and it was just inches missed our car. And there's a number of other times, too, where I almost died. So what you're saying has been with me from a little boy. I know exactly what you're saying is true. That's why I'm in this. I'm doing it for God and for all the victims. But I wanted to ask you...
We've all had those kinds of experiences, and that's what I'm sharing with everybody on the phone. And if we stop and think about that, and philosophy is what matters in this equation. That's the pillar that we must rely on in order to make everything make sense. And if again, we have the right philosophy, nothing can shake that. So if we all put things in that kind of perspective, that life is not about a personal pursuit of pleasure, but about some sort of service to the common good, and there should be pleasure in that alone. And if we all remember the times when we were saved or spared or something should have happened and didn't, that can put things in a different perspective where you feel your life doesn't belong to you, you owe it to the whole, and there's much more solace in that than trying to fight halfway only for the motivation of trying to get back to your personal pursuit of pleasure. There's no solace in that. So thanks for sharing that with us. We'll try to grab a couple more. Russ?
Yeah, thank you for calling, caller. It was great to hear that inspiring story. I mean, I will just add to that the spraying has damaged my health and put me in the hospital, and it made me realize how important it is to stand up for this fight, because most people who have that experience and end up in the hospital don't really know what the cause is. And so we're saving lives when we wake up.
But if you have a purpose of when you wake up every morning, if your purpose is to figure out how you can put another dent in the armor of the collective insanity, what rock haven't you turned over? What door haven't you knocked on? Who haven't you talked to? When you wake up every morning with that motive, what else can you do today to move that ball forward more? And that motive can provide a lot of solace. Again, and the passing the flyers on, when you wake somebody up and you realize that you have just widened their field of vision, that someone else just entered the fight because of what you did, there is huge satisfaction in that. Absolutely huge. That the army of those fighting for the common good just grew because of what you did. And I hope everybody, again, implements the tools we have, do it effectively, do it efficiently.
And don't be afraid. And don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. They are afraid of you. They're afraid of the public waking up, which is why these things are secret. So expose it. Expose it and be brave. Caller with your number that ends in 52. Who are we speaking with?
This is Doc Who from the chat room.
Hi, Doc.
Florida. I'm in Florida.
How are you, Doc? What's on your mind?
Well, I was just going to share some stuff. I see they're already talking about clay in the chat room. I was going to mention that. But there's a couple other things I want to mention that I don't see anybody talking about to speak of. And that is the electromagnetic soup that we breathe and take in vibrationally. I've got actually three things I'll mention, or four. And one is I've got a stetsorizer plugged into the wall, which modulates the harmful frequencies. I don't know if anybody knows about that.
I know what they are. It's certainly something that we can try to avoid. A lot of things in our environment, and those are good things to do. Ultimately, again, our time horizon is so immediate and dire that I hope people spend the majority of their effort trying to expose the one issue that could overturn the whole reality. If the power structure is fighting desperately on this one issue more than any other, to hide it as long as possible, because if it's exposed, just as Jim Phelps, I'll use his name openly now because it's already been disclosed by others. This is an architect from these programs that I communicated with personally. As he stated, if the population finds out about these programs, they will hunt down those responsible and hang them or shoot them in front of a firing squad. That's how the population will react. So again, no matter what we do to protect our health, and it matters, we all need to stay very vigorously engaged in the fight itself.
Yeah, if we don't have our nose above the water, we can't help anybody else.
I agree.
Another thing that I use is shungite, and I don't see very many people talking about that. Does anybody know about that? Do you know?
Are those things, because we have a limited time right now, maybe could those things be posted, Russ, in the chat room?
Yeah, absolutely. Sure.
If we could post those, and then because I'm afraid there might be
I don't have any links, but
there might be some details with this though that people might want to have a little more information on, and we don't have enough time here. But if you can post those things on the chat room so that people can gain that data, maybe Russ could help.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to mention, Doc?
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to talk just briefly about Shungite, and a lot of the geologists think that it came from the planet Phaeton. When it exploded, got hit. And it comes from Russia, and it has the carbon-60 molecule, which is called a fullerene.
There's enough details with this that I'm afraid we only have 4 minutes left. If we can post that kind of data, then I think that would be the best service to the listeners that probably won't remember the intricate details. But if you guys are connected, Russ, do you have Doc's email address?
He can contact me at russ@globalskywatch.com anytime, sure.
Okay, and maybe we could post that, Doc, so that people can get at more data for that.
Okie dokie.
Okay, and anything else, the other points you have as well, I mean, because there's a lot of details with these points, and they're valid points, but there's enough details there that it would take time to go through, and people might not catch all those details. If you can send that to us, and we can post that in the chat room, then I think that would serve the most people that way, Doc.
One more thing real quick.
Yes, sir.
And that is listening to 432 hertz music. It repairs your DNA. I put on a 10-hour tape from the computer and sleep with it all night like a log. And it also untangles, some of those harmful waves that we take in from 440 hertz music.
Maybe post that too, Doc. We'll look at all that. Thank you for the call. Russ, let's just try to grab one more while we can.
Great, thank you, Doc. That is very interesting information, and I would, if you want to hook up and send me an email, I'll be happy to help get that information out for people because I am very concerned about their health. One thing that a lot of people ask me about, Dane, is how long till the oceans rise? How long do we have?
Well, there's a lot of variables. Again, we are in uncharted territory, but some of the, I believe to be the more accurate data indicates we could see a meter in the next 10 years. All the data you see from the IPCC, all of it. When people talk about the IPCC, and for those that don't know what that is, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, it's the largest scientific panel ever assembled on any subject in human history. And a lot of people who don't want to believe there's anything wrong with the climate tend to state correctly that the IPCC's data is not correct. Well, that's true. Their data is not correct. It's far short of how bad it really is. So we hear IPCC estimates that we might have 18 inches of sea level rise by 2100. That's simply wrong. In fact, we have recent data, and I challenge anybody to Google this. Sea levels are rising much faster than previously thought, and this is a very non-linear equation. IPCC does not even consider methane in any of their modeling. How is that possible to exclude the single greatest climate disintegrating factor of all, not even included? So again, right now they're already having to pump out Miami constantly with high tides. Drains aren't working anymore. We have islands in the South Pacific that are literally going under. This is hard fact. So I encourage people to look this up. But Russ, to answer that question in short order, again, some of what I believe to be the most accurate estimates based on the non-linear equation we face, there could be as much as a meter in 10 years, and that would inundate cities around the globe.
Yeah, that would be very catastrophic in some places.
That's why they're trying so desperately to hide this. That's why the big snow cool downs in Boston, and they focus on the same cities to convince everybody the planet's freezing over when the opposite is actually true. And to create these cool downs, they're making the overall warming worse. The spraying, of course, as we all discussed before, yes, it can reflect some of the incoming thermal energy, but it traps more than it deflects, shreds the ozone layer, disrupts the hydrological cycle. I could go on and on and on. The negative effects far outweigh anything that they're selling it to us for as being a cure for.
Yep, absolutely. Hey, Kim just called in. I'm sorry we didn't get to your call, Kim, but we will next week. Always good to hear from you. This is Russ Tanner on behalf of GeoEngineering Watch Radio. We're here every Saturday at 12 noon Pacific Time, 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Please join us each week on UCY.
Blue skies are gold and white, lines up here, them say it's natural. Me now we live there.
is Ozzy Skateboard, and you're listening to YouthLive.tv.